What were some of the other numbers that they had here? Oh, these are here.
So now I switched it to performance reasons. So they kind of had two breakdowns. They had service reasons and performance reasons.
This one gives me a little bit of heartburn.
Yeah, this one. You know what it reminds me of? There was a study once on how many audits that they did, an audit of audits, and they were ramming this point home of how many of these it was the ERISA audits, or like a 401k audit, how many of them were wrong compared to how many were right.
Yeah.
And they were I got so sick of seeing the thing. I'm like, I do all mine right. Quit make me feel like we all do these wrong,
Yeah.
But this one gives me that same kind of angst when I look at it, because I'm like, wow, people, I can't imagine that this is kind of the level of service or the level of performance that they put out there.
Yeah, for the listener. So kind of the top thing that they said was that the 81% of people who fired a firm for performance reasons was because they were consistently making errors, which is just such a blanket reason. That does sound awful. You would have to get rid of a firm if they consistently made errors or missed deadlines. So yeah, these are just core things that
but it's so loaded in a lot of ways, because I would add a couple of words to that top line. Consistently makes errors. We could say consistently makes errors that we know of.
Yeah.
Right.
Or consistently makes errors that we got caught on.
Yeah.
Right?
Because somebody actually noticed.
Client believes they consistently made errors.
They believe they consistently made errors, and it's an error that the client thinks that the client themselves will get caught. Because I see clients wave off errors all the time when they come to the conclusion that nobody will ever catch those errors, right? And so it's like, once in a while you get that client or that business operator who's like, we're doing everything perfect. Everything's always going to be perfect no matter what. And so then, then once there's errors coming through, whether they're material or not, that creates a problem for that. But that's pretty rare in my experience.
Yeah.
Well, I would just say that the amount of errors that I found myself and then had to point out to a client are embarrassing enough to myself. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I'm like, man, if they didn't notice this, and some of them were, especially in the beginning of my career, I'm like, ugh, I can't believe I made that mistake. But the amount of, and they thought that was just fine. The majority didn't blink an eye at what you were presenting them, And so if a client, for the most part, is noticing that you're making errors, you're right, that there's probably a lot more errors that they didn't see,
sure,
under the hood.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing, which I don't know if I'm just over-interpreting the list and over-interpreting it, but I think what's not there is interesting in the sense that, okay, so I guess it's common sense that you want your accountants to not make errors, but what's not listed is a ranking of the clients, or a ranking of the accountant's professional ability, their expertise. Right. So they didn't ask this question, so that may be why it doesn't rank, right? But a question you could ask is, would you fire your existing accountant, or would you hire an accountant based on your perception of their expertise compared to others? Which is not exactly, which I think a lot of times on the client side, people conflate that with how many errors they make. Mm-hmm. But if you adjust that statement the way I suggested, if you adjust it to how many errors they actually catch the accountant making, right, then it's interesting, right? It's like, well, we'll fire an accountant because they make errors that we catch, but do we actually do anything in hiring accountants to evaluate their expertise ahead of time? Do we actually care about, is it like, do we care on the front end that our accountant has relevant and good expertise, or do we even want them to have the most expertise of the accountants that we could possibly hire, or do we simply care that they're sufficient and then they better not make any errors that we catch or they're out of here, right? Yeah. And that's the part that makes my heart, gives me heartburn, is that sensibility that the cynical side of me says, well, I feel like there may be kind of this undercurrent of, we actually don't care about the expertise, as long, we're just going to assume the expertise is some level of sufficiency, and on the back end, if people make too many errors, they're out.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're right. And I think also too, it's a little bit, it depends on the person. I think it depends on the customer, right? Like, I would say that, like we work with marijuana businesses, for instance. If you're in the business of marijuana, you better care about the technical excellence and like the legal soundness of your agreements. You better worry about like the accounting being done correctly, because the difference between not is losing your business, going under, not being able to deduct hundreds of thousands of dollars in expenses. You know, your risk reward versus knowing and having expertise in people you hire or not is high.
Yeah.
So especially at a time where that industry is flourishing, so it's like, now's the time to get everything right.
Right. Or I mean, I guess it's the early stage of that kind of industry.
And I see a different bent in that industry in the sense, because on this point of do you hire for expertise, I think when you're kind of in the more developed market, there is a fair share of companies that would I think they would say, not really. We think that, there's a range of accountants who all have about similar expertise. And so they really do, unfortunately, think of it more as a commodity. And so they don't necessarily hire for expertise. I think that happens in the more kind of developed industries and developed markets. I think the interesting pieces of the cannabis industry is that I have yet to meet a cannabis entrepreneur who didn't believe they had the best like super lawyer and super accountant and the best advisors ever. They all believe they have this nailed, right? The problem is they actually don't have a realistic way of evaluating that. So to me, that's kind of a different problem, is that they at least proclaim to desire expertise, but they don't actually have the right set of heuristics to evaluate expertise or not. And that part, I actually made a comment on somebody else's LinkedIn post today about that exact thing, because that's a hard nut to crack. I don't know how to solve that problem in every case when we're talking to people, because putting myself in the entrepreneur's shoe, I have a lot of empathy. I have a lot of empathy for the black box problem that they're facing. Right, they're growing in a business in a new developing market. It's complicated in a lot of ways. There's a lot of regulatory complication. It's reasonable that they don't necessarily have a skill set to evaluate the competency of their accountants or some of their other professional advisors, and so it becomes a black box. And so they're doing the best they can, and so you got to. If I were in their situation, not only can I imagine that I wouldn't be perfect at it, but I also think it would be very stressful for me to have to make a decision on something that I don't have a complete understanding of. And entrepreneurs do that every day. That's part of what they have to do. But I guess we have the luxury that in our own entrepreneurial endeavors as accountants, that part we don't worry about, because we have professional acumen there. It doesn't even come to our mind that we're going to hire the wrong kind of accountant or somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, because that part we've got nailed, right? We have other pieces of the business that we may not understand. Like in my own world, it's like sometimes the sales process is a bit of a black box for me, and I get frustrated with not fully understanding kind of how that should work, because that's not my area of expertise, in all ways. And so just going back to having empathy for that entrepreneur who has to make a black box decision on that, and thinking about, I'm always thinking about, how can I help alleviate their stress on this? What can I do to show them the truth about it, and get it so that they can actually feel comfortable that they have the truth? And because I can show them the truth, like I know what the truth is, I can show it to them all day long, but it's really that second piece. I mean, how can I somehow educate them enough in a short amount of time that they can feel comfortable that I'm telling them the truth, that I'm the one that's actually telling them how it really is? And I think that's, like I said earlier, that's a nut I haven't quite cracked. I don't think I have that solved, and I think that's a very hard problem to solve.
Yeah, I think you said the right word there. Educate them as much as they're willing to be educated about what's going on.
Yeah.
Because that is like the tightrope walk, right? If you just go and dump information in their lap and try to seem like that, like you're trying to profess, this look at what I've accomplished kind of thing. So you're getting your money's worth, or that I have technical experience, or I know what I'm doing, as opposed to like, hey, I'm paying for you to do this service. Like, why do you keep inundating me with all this information about what you've been doing?
Right.
Right. So like, you have to give them enough so that they feel comfortable about what's being done.
Right.
But then you also can't overload them with unnecessary stuff, I mean, like, or try to show them something like a full set of like a full P&L. Why would any owner would ever want to see that, like line by line?
Right.
so many widgets and whatever else that, I don't care about bathroom supplies. Why, what's my bottom line? What am I going to pay on taxes? What am I going to, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.